We will, oh, thanks. We will go to folks on Zoom, starting with Garyana.
Hi, good afternoon. Garyana Youngblood, Office of Reentry and Justice.
And then, there you go. You got it. I saw you unmute yourself.
Yes, hi, I'm Michelle Elizondo, Program Coordinator with the Office of Reentry and Justice. Glad to be here.
And I'm Liana Willis, Planner Evaluator with the Office of Reentry and Justice.
And I'm Jill Ray with the Office of Supervisor Candace Anderson.
Good afternoon, Chris James with the W. Haywood Burns Institute.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. At this time, we will hold space for any announcements. Are there any announcements from folks? I'll start with folks in the room, and then if there's anybody on Zoom. All right, hearing and seeing none. We'll go to item number 2, which public.
Can I do one? I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'll
yes.
do one real quick. It's Matt. Because I know this has come up in the overall body. We'll be announcing within the next probably day or maybe by Monday, the period of time for public proposals to change or add local rules for the court. So that's a period of about 45 days where we accept proposals in, then get reviewed by court committees. So that'll go probably through July 8th. Whether I get it out tomorrow or Monday won't make a difference in that period. So that'll get announced out. I do an email. I don't know if everybody indirectly or directly will get that announcement, because I know it goes to the board and to several other folks. So just wanted everyone to be aware of that.
Thanks, Matt. I will turn it over to Jill.
I just wanted to ask a quick question on that. I know it's public comment period, but I'm just curious, Matt, if that includes jury selection processes.
Those are part of the local rules. So if someone were to want to make suggestions about that, this would be the period to do that between now and approximately that first week in July.
Thanks so much.
Once I announce it. Yeah, once I announce it. Again, that should be tomorrow or Monday at the latest.
That's good to know. Are there any other announcements or questions? If not, are there any public comment at this time? Hearing and seeing no public comments. Next, we'll move to item number 3, which is to approve the record of action for our February 22nd meeting. I'll give folks a couple minutes to look it over. And then if we can get a motion.
I move we approve the record of action.
Thanks, Patrice. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. And Garyana, can we have a roll call vote?
Yes, Shannon Ortland.
I'll say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Shannon Ortland, do you approve?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, couldn't hear you. Alberto Garibay.
Yes.
Patrice Guillory.
Yes.
Shayla Bonner.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right. And at this time, any public comments for our record of action? I think I was supposed to do that first. Sorry. All right. Hearing and seeing none. Next, we'll move to item number 4, which is to discuss county agency readiness for data collection / presentations.
Yeah, so I can take this one, Shayla. We added this item to the agenda following some conversations that were taking place during the full body meeting regarding a couple of requests to have, or at least bring some presentations forward, and also just maybe start the conversation of resuming some of this data sharing with with respect to individual agencies. So I know that Mackey specifically asked for to possibly have a presentation on, if I'm getting it correctly, the status of schools, and there was just some changes in so some of the I don't want to say data collection, but at least there was just new information, we'll put it that way, coming out regarding various school districts that may be of interest to our job body. I don't know if there's more that you can speak to in terms of the context of that.
You know, I don't know that conversation. I do know in Ed Services, we're working with technology to get data sharing agreements in place for all of our LEAs to have access to their school information system, CalPads, for a variety of reasons. Mostly in Ed Services is to support them in inputting cleaner data, knowing what to do with the data and so forth. So I'm not sure what she was referring to, but that's, we're working on that in progress.
Okay. And she mentioned too that there's coming up, I guess, updates to various LCAPs that will be.
Yes.
Yeah, so some of the pieces of information, particularly related to like restorative justice and PBIS interventions, might be coming to the forefront, and that might be an area of interest to look at.
Yes.
Particularly.
All LCAPs are, have to be gone to information and approved by July 1st.
Okay.
And charters only have one meeting, but all of those will go to the board over the next month. And then our office reads those and goes back just before we approve them. So after they're approved, I'll have more information.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. And then obviously on our side, I mean, we recently brought online a case management system at the probation department. Though our own team is still capable of sharing information as we have in the past regarding call intakes and demographic breakdowns and all of that stuff. We hope to maybe be able to provide similar breakdowns on the adult side as well with the new case management system. So I think our side is also sort of trying to beef up our own data capacity in that regard, so we can share out a little bit more information as well. And then Garibay, I don't know if there's been any further talks at the sheriff's office regarding, I believe there was a Measure X request on hiring additional data analysts and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I've not heard of any headway when it comes to that, so I'd have to inquire further about that.
Okay. And then what about with the courts? Any data collection or information updates?
Not specifically, no. I mean, I guess I could answer a specific question, but in terms of how we operate with the data, it hasn't, there's no updates or changes.
Okay. So at least within each individual agency, I guess more to come. And we can start to eventually, I guess maybe in future meetings, determine what specific presentations we can bring forward from each agency. Does that sound about right for folks?
I think that would be helpful, and also really looking at a data sharing agreement, because that seems to be the stumbling block or the challenge to a lot of data sharing, and who owns it and who protects it and how it's stored, how it's disposed of. So I think that just being in that world in a school district, you have to have that legal piece to it, and everybody has to have the same, you know, there's users of different systems, just to kind of keep that in mind. But sometimes people start with the platform first of how you can manage the data, and before they understand the flow of the data and who has access and can share the data.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if he is on, Peter or Kendra. I don't think so. I know that they have been in talks with, or at least starting to explore, having conversations with Cal Policy Lab to also kind of give some guidance around that. Denise has shared that before with this body in terms of a potential hub space for a lot of this information flow. But I believe their approach is essentially it's project-based, so it's a specific research question that they'll have to answer. So I think they're exploring what certain possibilities may come from that may be of interest to all of the agencies on our job, so.
And my understanding is CPL will also do, a project can be about data linkage too. So it doesn't have to actually be an analysis, but the project could be taking our education data and linking it with law enforcement or probation data in all these different ways, because there are various algorithms and sounds like kind of mechanisms that they're pretty sophisticated at.
And there's a couple of counties that are already, Riverside County has done this with many of their LEAs and their community agencies. And Santa Clara, I know Alameda is working on it right now.
Oh, great. Oh, that's really great. Really great. Okay. Cool. Fantastic.
So I have a silly question, only because I don't know about data sharing and stuff. So is the agreement typically done with between the agencies, or is it done with like, probation and ORESJ, or probation and oh my gosh, why am I blanking? ORJ, or how does that typically work? Because I have zero clue of how the agreements work.
Well, I'll tell you how we've done it in my tenure with the ORJ and how we're doing it now in probation. We have a number of data sharing agreements in place. We have one that is with health services. So to kind of try a test run of matching our data with housing data and to kind of make some assessments there. But the idea would be that each agency or department who has an interest or a responsibility for keeping that data in our world confidential or anonymous, if possible, has a vested interest in that. Now, we also have one in place with Cal Policy Labs for a couple of research projects. And that data sharing agreement went through county council and was pretty rigorous. And it is kind of a standard template, but each project then gets added on as an addendum, which I really, really like, because then it means that we're covered all the bases. County council has already done it, and I can just all my colleagues over there and say, hey, could you add this on? Yes, could you make an amendment, and we're ready to go. So it really just depends, Shayla, on who the organizations are, what their interest is in the data, and also, I believe, what kind of data that you're talking about. If you're talking about PI&I, then there's going to be a lot more things in place surrounding the controls and the security of the data. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I just wasn't sure how all that stuff works in the background. Okay.
Yeah, and I will say that we're doing some kind of a quick data pull right now for behavioral health. They want to have some information surrounding juveniles, and we're just running numbers for them and stripping all the identifying information out. So, we don't need a data request doesn't necessarily need a data sharing agreement. It depends upon the level of depth of the analysis that's going to be necessary.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool. Are there any public comments on item number 4? Not hearing or seeing any hands raised on Zoom. We can move to item number 5, which is a presentation of RIPA analysis among youth in Contra Costa County for 2022. And
Okay.
that would be attachment number 2. Sorry, go ahead.
There you go. Thanks, Shayla. And I'll just make a quick intro here. This analysis was driven basically by our interest in prevention and our interest in understanding what law enforcement interactions with young people is like. The fortuitous event for us was that the 2022 RIPA data was recently released. And not only was it recently released, but it included all law enforcement agencies in the county. And I will let Liana present some more of the details on this. Liana Willis is our most recent planner and evaluator and will be our next most recent person to depart. You'll see she's this work is pretty fantastic, and she's going to leverage her skills and jaunt off to grad school next month. So anyway, this is an example of some of her efforts. So Liana, why don't you go ahead and get started? Take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Denise. And I will go ahead and share my screen really quickly. Pull up the PowerPoint. Okay, can everyone see the slideshow clearly? Okay, great. Thank you so much. And as Denise mentioned, my name is Liana Willis, and I will be presenting some of our findings on the RIPA data set about law enforcement stops of youth in Contra Costa County during 2022. Okay, and to just give an overview of the agenda, I'll start off by introducing, some background about RIPA, and then we'll get into some of the findings that we found about the youth that were stopped in Contra Costa County and some of the things that went on during the stops, trends and what happened during stops, and whether there were any racial disparities in stop actions that youth were subjected to during their stops. And then I will go over a little bit of a summary of the findings and broader implications for the county and the work of this body. And then we'll close it off with a Q&A opportunity for anyone to ask any questions that they had about the presentation. And so to start off, what is RIPA? So RIPA stands for the Racial and Identity Profiling Act, otherwise known as AB 953. It was enacted in 2015 in the state of California, and the purpose of the legislation was to eliminate racial and identity profiling in law enforcement by requiring all law enforcement agencies in the state to report data on their stops. And the act also established a board that receives all of the data and analyzes it and puts out an annual report detailing the findings and providing some recommendations for policy and practice to law enforcement. And a little more background. So data collection began in 2018. It started off with the largest departments in the state, and then with each subsequent year expanded to include smaller agencies. And so 2022 was the first year that every law enforcement agency in the state of California reported their stop data, which is why it's a particularly interesting year for us to take a look at. And the types of data reported include perceived demographic information about stopped individuals, the primary reasons for each stop, any actions taken by officers during stops, and any results of the stop, which can include arrests. And again, the stop data is made publicly available through the California Department of Justice's Open Justice website. And so the purposes of the current analyses, I mentioned earlier that the RIPA board publishes a report that talks about what goes on, the data that's reported statewide by law enforcement agencies. Our work wanted to zero in on Contra Costa County. and specifically to focus on stops of individuals that were perceived to be youth. Number one, to help to better understand how law enforcement interact with young people in the county, and to assess whether there was any variation by perceived race ethnicity of youth that were stopped. And one of the broader motivations for this work is prevention, and largely to inform and prevention efforts in the county, because we know that youth arrest is associated with future criminal behavior and justice involvement spanning adulthood as well. And so kind of understanding what goes on with youth at one potential entry point into the system can inform prevention efforts. And then for this body, specifically the data subcommittee, it's also useful to kind of give an overview of what's available in the RIPA data set, specifically to data for Contra Costa County, for your efforts to build, law enforcement data collection capacity and other of your goals. And so in 2022, Contra Costa County law enforcement agencies reported 1,472 stops of individuals whom officers perceived to be under the age of 18. However, we did exclude some cases from this analysis. About 82 stops were of individuals perceived to be under the age of 10. So we excluded those because it's believed that those individuals are likely passengers or individuals present during a stop of an older caregiver. So we excluded those, as well as another 28 stops that were reported for the purpose of community caretaking, which is defined as unrelated to actual or suspected violations of the law. So for example, welfare checks would be an example of a community caretaking stop. And so to conclude, we ended up with 1,362 youth stops in our final analysis who were stopped for actual or suspected violations, and who officers believed to be between ages 10 and 17. So now let's talk about who are the youth being stopped, some of the demographics of youth that were stopped in the county in 2022. And so here you can see the distribution of ages of youth, starting with on the left-hand side, 10-year-olds, 11, 12, ending with ages 17 on the far right. And you can see that stops of youth start to pick up with individuals perceived to be around age 15. And then the majority of youth were perceived to be age 17. And then on the left-hand side here, we have perceived reported genders of stopped youth. So about 70% in this blue here were perceived to be male. And then another 30% perceived to be female. And then this red here, about 1% perceived to be transgender or gender nonconforming. And then on the right, we do the same thing, but for race ethnicity, perceived race ethnicity. And so the blue represents Black youth, about 13% of stopped youth. The yellow represents Latinx youth, 19% of stopped youth. White youth made up 52%, or perceived white youth, that is. And then youth perceived to be of another race ethnicity made up 16% of the stopped population. And so we can see that the majority of youth in the sample were male, and about more than half were white. And then building upon the race ethnicity even further. So on the left-hand side, we have what we just discussed, the breakdowns of perceived race ethnicities at the time of stop, with Black youth in blue at the bottom, Latinx above that, white and other youth at the top. And then on the right, we compare that to the demographics of the county population overall, the county youth population per the US Census. So we can see that, as mentioned earlier, white youth make up 52% of the stop population. 52% of the stop population, which is a larger share than their share of the county. So in other words, white youth do appear to be overrepresented in the stop population. However, we can also see that Black youth at the bottom are also overrepresented in the stop population, making up 8% of the county population and 13% of the stop population. And then we can also see that Latinx youth and youth of other perceived race ethnicities are underrepresented, making up smaller proportions of the stop population than their share of the county overall. So we've talked a little bit about who the youth are that are being stopped, and now let's get into why officers reported that they stopped these youth. And so here in the blue, we could see that a little over 70% of stops of youth were for traffic violations. And then in the green here, we can see that a little under a quarter, about 24%, were for reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. And then in the yellow, a little under 5% were stopped for other reasons. Other reasons for stop included things such as truancy investigations or consensual encounters leading to searches. So the majority of youth were stopped for traffic violations. And then building upon that a little further, we break it down by perceived race ethnicity in terms of the reasons for stop. And we can see here that Black youth had a much larger share of stops for reasonable suspicion of criminal activity as compared to youth of the other perceived race ethnicities. Reasonable suspicion stops made up about 44% of reasons for stops among Black youth, whereas other youth had much larger proportions of stops for traffic violations. And it's also worth noting that among Latinx youth, there's a larger proportion of stops for that other reason for stop category. And so now we've talked about who's getting stopped. We've talked a little bit about why officers stop the youth, and now breaking down to what's going on during the stops. And so here in the green here, we can see that a little over 70% of stops did not involve any subjection to actions during the stop. So in 70% of stops, youth were not subjected to any actions. And then in just under 30% of stops, youth were subjected to actions. And we build upon this a little further, again, breaking it down by race ethnicity. And we can see that among Black youth, it is almost evenly split between stops where they were and were not subjected to actions, which means that Black youth had a larger share of stops where they were subjected to actions as compared to youth of other race ethnicities. And so when we say stop actions, this kind of breaks down what we mean by that. One of the largest categories of stop actions among that 30% of youth that were subjected to stop actions, 26% of those were involved being detained in a patrol car or on a curb. 26% involved miscellaneous physical contacts with officers. Most of these contacts were not specified, it's not specified in the data set what specifically many of those actions were, but of the types of contact that were specified, one example would be physical removal from a vehicle. And then another 20% of stops or of actions were searches. And then you can see in green, these are the share of stops that were where youth were handcuffed, the share of actions where youth were received some other type of action, such as property seizures or vehicle impounds in this color right here. And then in the dark blue, the share of actions where youth were ordered to exit their vehicle. And so we break this down by race once again, in terms of the types of actions. Largely the colors are the same as in the previous slide, with the exception of this pink color here. This represents the miscellaneous physical contacts. And so we can see that Black and Latinx youth had a larger share of stops where they were searched as compared to youth of other perceived race ethnicities. Black youth had a larger share of stops where they were handcuffed compared to other race ethnicities. Latinx youth had a larger share of stops where they were ordered to exit their vehicles rather than compared to other race ethnicities. And then youth that were perceived to be in the other race ethnicity category had the largest share of stops with miscellaneous physical contacts. And so now talking about kind of what happens, what the ultimate outcome of the stops were. So in the green, about 47% of stops of youth ended in a warning. About 44% of these ended in a citation, and then about 9% ended with the youth being arrested. These are not all of the outcomes that could result of a stop. These were just 3 that we decided to take a look at. And some other potential outcomes of stop were contacting a guardian or psychiatric holds. But again, these were some of the most common outcomes of stops. And breaking this down by perceived race ethnicity, once again, we can see that Black youth had the highest share of stops within that resulted in an arrest as compared to other race ethnicities. Oh, Denise, did you want to say something?
No.
Oh, sorry.
No.
I thought you raised your hand. Okay.
Oh, no,
continue.
I just scratched my ear.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No
And
worries.
so, yeah, so Black youth had the largest share of stops that resulted in arrest as compared to youth of other race ethnicities, whereas youth with other race ethnicities had larger proportions of citations, stop sending in a citation. And white youth also had the largest share of stops that ended in a warning. And so now we've talked about who's getting stopped, why the initial reason for the stop, and what's going on during the stop. And now we want to circle back a little bit to those actions during stop that we talked about to see if there are racial disparities in those stop actions. And so here we have calculated the rates per 1,000 youth of each race ethnicity in the county and the relative rate indexes. So on this left-hand column here, you can see the different types of actions during stop that we talked about earlier, being ordered to exit a vehicle, being detained, handcuffed, so on and so forth. And then within each cell, we have on the top the rate for every 1,000 youth of that race ethnicity that were subjected to that action. For example, here, for every 1,000 white youth in the county, 1.7 were detained. For every 1,000 Black youth in the county, 4 were detained, and so on and so forth in each cell. And then below that, in parentheses, we have the relative rate indexes. And so that basically compares the rate of each action for one race ethnicity as compared to the rate for white youth. So a relative rate index of 1 indicates an equivalent rate or representation of a certain action as compared to white youth. A relative rate index less than 1 indicates an underrepresentation in a certain action as compared to white youth. And then a relative rate index greater than 1 indicates an overrepresentation in subjection to a certain action as compared to white youth. And so in this category, they're all going to be 1 because this is the category for white youth, and white youth is also the comparison group. Over here, if we look at Black youth, we can see that the relative rate index for being detained is 2.4, which means that Black youth are 2.4 times overrepresented in their rate of being detained as compared to white youth. Here for handcuffing, we can see that they are 4.5 times overrepresented in being handcuffed compared to white youth. And then for Latinx youth, you can see that the relative rate index is 0.5, so they are underrepresented in being handcuffed as compared to white youth. So if we look across this entire category, we can see that Black youth are overrepresented in subjection to all of these actions compared to white youth, with the exception of miscellaneous physical contacts, where they have an equivalent rate of subjection to that action. And if we look at this very bottom column here, we also have the rate of not being subjected to any action during the stop. And we can see that for each perceived race ethnicity, there's an underrepresentation in not being subjected to any actions as compared to white youth. So white youth have higher proportion or rate of not being subjected to any action during their stops as compared to other race ethnicities. And so to conclude, although there are limitations to the RIPA data, such as the fact that officers are reporting perceived demographic information, the findings indicate that racial disparities exist in law enforcement interactions with youth in the county. And more specifically, disparities exist in the reasons for officer actions during and outcomes of youth stops by county law enforcement. And these were particularly prevalent among youth perceived to be Black, who were disproportionately suspected of criminal activity, at higher risk of subjection to a variety of different actions during stops, and also constituted the largest share of arrested youth in the data set, while making up less than 10% of the population of youth in the county. And so the implications of this work highlight the importance of maximizing access to prevention and diversion services, particularly among Black youth. That will be important for preventing kind of that broader gateway into the system and longer term system involvement. And then also training opportunities to inform law enforcement about youth development and behavior can help with informing best practices for de-escalation and to further reduce some of those disparities in the actions that officers take during stops of young people. And with that, I will go ahead and open it up for any questions or comments.
Thank you for that. That was actually great. I love the presentation. I loved all the breakdown of the charts. One thing that I'm super happy to see is the sorry, my little one, is the relative rate index. I think that is super helpful to have and to include. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I want to open it up for Q&A. And I think we have somebody in the room that has to leave at 4. Is that right, Garyana?
Shannon.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so then we'll lose our quorum, I think, when that happens. So yeah, want to open it up for any of our members. If there are any questions, any comments, and then we can open up public comments to the rest of the group.
So Shayla,
I see hands going in the room, but I can't. I can't. Y'all look like little ants. So, Denise, was your hand raised?
My hand was waving. Both of them, actually. I want to offer a couple of comments surrounding this data as we're looking into it. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that this is perceived age and it's perceived race and ethnicity of the young people. So we may or may not be right on this data. So it's not validated. One of the things that was very striking to us was the underrepresentation of the Latino population here as relative to the broad county population for this age group. And one of the possibilities surrounding that speaks to that young people of Latino background can often look like they are of Caucasian background or even African American if they are biracial or multiracial. So again, the data is it's muddy. I will also say, as we were trying to think about how to better understand this and understand it broadly as it relates to the other research literature and analyses that have been conducted across the country. One thing came forward from Texas is that there's a theory that in Texas, they are underreporting stops among the Latino population for fear that they're going to be labeled as, you know, promoting these kinds of disparities. So they're erring on the side of it not disclosing. So we have no reason to believe that that's going on here in any way at all, but it was just an interesting perception. The other thing I will add is that we started our Policing the Teen Brain, or our Strategies for Youth project, basically a month or so ago. And 2 months ago, the team from Strategies for Youth was out and conducted their assessment of the county, talked to a number of folks, and did kind of a quick and dirty assessment as to how law enforcement feels about the RIPA data. Do they think it's good data, or do they think it's not so good? And a couple of people that we talked to did not think it was very reliable data. And so that was interesting in and of itself. So I think this is an analysis that sort of speaks to the possibilities, but is not, you know, there's a lot of caveats. So that was it. Jill, I see your hands up too.
As long as everybody on the board is done asking questions, I'm happy to ask my question.
I was just gonna add to your,
Yeah.
having experience, right, work in the field. I can tell you that there's many times when, if you were to listen to radio traffic and they put out bolos, be on the lookout, or traffic to other units, you will often hear white or Hispanic, because it's at the youth age. Sometimes it's very hard to tell, especially at night when we have to punch in the perception of it. It's very, very difficult. So oftentimes you will hear that quite a bit, white or Hispanic, male or female. And so that's why the numbers are probably a little bit skewed. When you see a big representation of white, they may be
Just erring in them.
erring on that side potentially. I don't want to speak.
Right.
But that often is the case when dispatch relays information. You will hear that quite a bit, white or Hispanic, unless it's super clear or really clear to the officer. It's hard to tell.
Right. Oh, that's a
Anyways,
really
my
interesting
2 cents on
perspective.
that
Thank you.
experience.
That's really good to know.
So my question is, and thank you, Denise and Liana, for that amazing report. I look forward to sitting down with it and really looking through it. But my question is this information easily sortable by community? In other words, some of our communities, I mean, the demographics aren't the same across the county. And so I'd be curious to see if there's certain communities that are showing different results than others.
Yes, so there is data within the data set. It does show not only the law enforcement agency that conducted each stop, it's also available the location where the stop took place. The majority of the time they're the same. The stopping agency is stopping within their own municipality, but there were some cases where there were stops that took place outside, but that is available in the data.
So we do have that data, Jill, and we have not analyzed this data to that level of detail at this point. And have not been.
I think it'd be a super good idea, as we're, not to point fingers, but in all of the work that we're doing in our county to see how it's going, because in some communities, it may be the percentage of the population of certain races is higher or lower.
Right. Well,
which would impact the stop data.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's a tricky question for us. And I think it's something that needs to have, from my perspective, the chief's input on. I completely agree that for this body, it is important. But given that I'm a representative of probation, I do not want to be out calling, saying that the sheriff's office or Clayton or Moraga or any other agency has higher rates than others. So it becomes a tricky thing. I also think it's very tricky when you're looking at some of these numbers. You can look at the counts of arrests by racial group, but when you go and look at the racial or the relative rate index, you will see something that you are not expecting. And it's very different, very different. So certainly we'll bring it up with the chief and see what she thinks and proceed with our analysis with her approval.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to suggest that this group do that. I just wanted to know if that is available because eventually this will be
Sure.
transitioning to the
Sure.
yes, this will be transitioning to our ESJ, and that is, I think, important information. And as they work with communities and as they work with jurisdictions, and we want to make sure that, you know, we're not making broad sweeping statements. If there's some jurisdictions that are doing more than others, and we want, you know, it's important.
Absolutely. And the data is available, readily available, and certainly we're happy to support the ORESJ or even Burns if somebody else wanted to move this to that next level. So that's great. Okay. Thanks, Liana.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Oh, Peter's here now. Great. Perfect timing, Peter. We were just talking about you.
Yeah,
You're on
I felt my ears burning.
We just put
Apologies.
another task on your plate.
Oh yeah, we don't have enough. Apologies for being late. Apologies, we had just come from a meeting that we were hosting that ran over. So I'm just trying to get caught up on the conversation. But if there are any particular questions that were directed to me when I was not here, I can try to address them. But again, I have not been privy to the conversation so far.
Yeah, no, it was me that invoked you once again, Peter. So you're like, there's Jill. And I said sometime in the future, just FYI, you'll want to see the report that Leanna just presented. It was very interesting.
And I would also just like to point out that at the back of the attachments for this meeting, we also have 2 data briefs that sort of summarize this work. And my hope is that they are readily accessible and available for the community or for sharing more broadly without a 20-page presentation. So it's kind of a snapshot of a data brief that we've been putting out recently.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Before we move on, just want to make sure I didn't miss anybody for public comment on item number 5. Sorry. All right, hearing and seeing none. Item number 6 is next steps.
Shayla, I have a few next steps.
Go for it.
And please let me know if there's anything that I missed. What I've heard today is discuss what presentations to request from each agency and also to review any data sharing agreements. But is there anything else that I could add to the list for the data subcommittee as next steps for next meeting?
I don't have any. I'm just wondering if Diversion has also seen this presentation, because I think it's great information for them as well as they deal with, youth diversion. Although this is more so of the stops and the arrests, I think it's just good to know, like, the demographics of like who's getting arrested. So yeah, that was just one little comment, but no, I can't think of anything else for next step. Unless Patrice or Chris or anybody else has anything.
Yeah, really quickly, I can confirm that diversion, at least, you know, the diversion subcommittee as a whole has not seen this presentation in a meeting yet. So, you know, that might be worthwhile. Hopefully there are, you know, quite a few developments on the next diversion agenda, but certainly worth, you know, seeing if we can make time for, you know, a presentation on this as well. And the only other thing I would think is we might want to circle back on the sheriff's quarterly report, because we started that work attempting to refine or make certain requests or ask the board to make certain requests, you know, as far as what's included in that report. So we probably want to finalize that.
I agree. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sorry. Apologies if I should know this already, but are there specific data points that have already been established by RJOB in terms of the kinds of data that we want to collect? I mean, I really appreciate this report that I'm kind of putting eyes on for the first time now that probation has provided around stops and contacts. Hearing that diversion is another area, but I'm just kind of curious, is there some place where I can kind of go look and see, oh, yep, these are the data points that we have already determined or that we want to look for and dig into?
There is a list. I'm not sure where it's housed, but I know even a while back, we created a list that we want to see. And then we also just recently did some revisions to what we want the sheriff to report out on. So I'm not exactly sure where it's housed. I did see Garyana come off mute, so I'm not sure if she has an answer to that.
I have the list from CEF, but I do not have the list for data, and I'm not sure if what you're looking for and what CEF is looking for is the same thing. But I have that information, Peter, that I could share with you.
Mute. You're on mute.
Something that our office has been really thinking hard about is that, you know, as we prepare and have been discussing with ORJ, the transition of some of the staffing duties, you know, later on this year, you know, how do we really wrap our arms around some of the established goals and tasks of our job, like, right out the gate? And we really feel like data is probably going to be that one that we really want to already be able to move on quickly once we engage. And so it would be great to know if there are what are kind of the specific categories of data, the data sets, the data points that this group has already determined as needed. So anything that kind of speaks to that, Garyana, would be helpful, because we're also initiating some conversations to kind of see, yeah, what's possible and how can we get moving on it as soon as possible.
Okay, I'll send it to you.
Right on, thank you.
Also, if you might want to pull up the request to the DA that was sent, because you guys had an ask of certain data points from the DA, and I don't think that's been fulfilled, but that would be a good also point of context for Peter.
And Peter, just one other thing, the data requests or the data points that have been discussed to my knowledge, and even in the past, have been agency specific, not necessarily specific data points that you want to see across the entire continuum.
Great, thank you. Understood. I mean, I think we just build off whatever we've already kind of established and go from there.
Seems, if there are no other comments or questions, our next meeting is scheduled for June 27th. from 3 to 5. I actually won't be able to make that meeting. We have a staff retreat and we're going out of the city. We'll be in Monterey for our staff retreat, and it's a week-long retreat. So I won't be able to make it in person. I could probably join by Zoom, but I know we're limited to how many Zooms we can attend, but let me know.
Chala, Shayla, I don't think you heard, but this committee, we're gonna be there in Monterey with you. We're gonna
Okay. Join
Just-
us. We'll have a bonfire on the beach or something. I don't know.
And Shayla, if you're gonna be in a public space, like a hotel or something like that, you can give Gariana your address.
The address.
And then
Okay.
you just post the agenda outside there, and anybody who wants to come and join in your meeting in Monterey can. That's an
Sounds
option.
good.
And then you don't have to use one of your exceptions. That's
Okay.
compliant with the Brown Act.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. No, I wouldn't mind posting that address. For sure. Okay, well, if that's all, no more comments, no more questions, I will conclude the meeting for today. Right on time, 4 p.m. Look at there.
All right.